Chris Stone. I'm the executive sports editor of the LA Times. And I guess a good place to start is to explain how we ended up here. And for the better part of the last year, we've been speaking to Kelly and his teams about a new way to kind of connect with their audience, with hockey fans. And we had been doing a bi-weekly hockey roundtable at latimes.com in which, they produced some really interesting conversations. And we thought, well, listen, we're creating a virtual roundtable here. Why don't we create something that actually elevates this and helps us connect with fans even in a deeper way? Why don't we bring these conversations to the fans like yourself here? So that's how we're here, and I want to introduce the other four people joining us tonight. To my far right is Zach Dooley, beat writer for LAKings.com. Jesse Cohen, radio personality, podcaster. To my left is Helene Elliott, a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, longtime hockey writer, now columnist for the LA Times. And to her left is Hans Tesselaar, the hockey editor for the LA Times. So we're going to get this going. Why did we choose this particular date? And I wouldn't say this was 100% the reason we chose it, but we did really zero in on this game because of the shared history between the two opponents tonight. They go way back, and just a little bit of a history lesson here. Does anybody know what tonight is the anniversary of? Well, not that I expect anybody to raise their hand and provide the answer, but you're probably going to say, look, dummy, the Miracle in Manchester's anniversary is Sunday. But what I'm referring to actually is Game 1 of that series, which to me was every bit as crazy as Game 3 of that series. If you guys remember it, a Kings team that had 63 points that season, and only by virtue of Don Cherry's Colorado Rockies did they get into the postseason, where they were facing the Edmonton Oilers, who finished that season with 111 points. I believe they scored 420 goals as a team that year, if you think about that. 5 goals a game, which was not necessarily so crazy then, seems crazy now. But Game 1, if you'll remember, 18 goals were scored in that game, and the Kings scored 10 of them. And I'm pretty sure that in the history of the NHL playoffs, there's never been a game that ended 10-8. So, anyways, but that was 40 years ago. So that has nothing to do with today. But what we do have tonight is a game that offers a pretty decent possibility of a preview of the Kings' return to the postseason. And we're going to use that as a jumping off point to really kind of get into, weather aside, it feels like playoff weather out here. So, Zach, let's just start out. Let's just assume that this is the matchup in the first round. How do these two teams match up in your mind?
I actually thought when these two teams played last week in Edmonton, it was the perfect maybe microcosm of Kings and Oilers. The first half of that game was controlled by the Oilers. They had their speed, their skill, more offensive opportunities, and that's how they like to play. They're free-flowing, they can create. They have two of the best 5 players in the NHL, McDavid and Draisaitl. Those guys controlled that game, but the Kings weathered the storm. They fought back in the second period, and from that point on, the Kings played to their identity, which is to control the puck possession, volume shooting, getting second chances, third chances, and in the third period of that game, the Kings had the first 12 shots on goal. So you saw both sides of it. When the Kings play their style of hockey, when the Oilers play their style of hockey, both teams can impose their game on the other. Neither team is necessarily better than the other, but it's kind of which team is more to their identity at the time. And I thought that game last week was a perfect maybe preview of what that can look like in 60 minutes.
Helene, same question.
I'm not sure I saw that game because I think I was covering the Lakers that night, so forgive me. But I'm really looking forward to this game tonight. I think everybody who's in this room knows what the Edmonton Oilers scoring potential is. Draisaitl, McDavid, it's just straight firepower. And the Kings have a young defense, although they're starting to get some bodies back. Matt Roy is coming back tonight. So that should help a little bit. But as Chris said, in terms of a playoff preview, I think as much as both teams say, oh, it's just another game and every game is important, I think for players on both teams, they're taking notes off this game and making mental notes about, so-and-so's habit is to do this, or his tendency is to go right or to go left or whatever. And I think this will be a very good measuring stick game for the Kings.
Jesse?
I'm going to cheat and say that this year has been not just this year, but this year and last year have been so unusual. I don't know what to expect. You could tell me any possible score of the series, and I would believe you as a prediction. You could say either team would win by any margin, and I would believe it was completely possible. Like I said, it's a cheat, it's a cop-out, but that's my gut feeling.
Zach, you referenced team identity, which I think is actually a really interesting theme. And I want to talk about that identity because identity is built out over time. You brought it up, but I'm going to kick it over to Hans. I mean, Hans, in your mind, what is the identity of this particular Kings team in your mind?
I think what we're seeing with this Kings team is a heart and passion that hasn't been seen in a long time. I mean, these guys... They're not the most talented team in the league, but this team works its tail off. And, there's been a long rebuild, and it appears to be, a success right now. They're not in the playoffs. Look, the Kings could be anywhere from second in the division, third in the division. They could be a wildcard team. They could be out of the playoffs. I mean, they have to win nearly every game or at least get points in their remaining 10 games. It's a young team with a mix of some of the veterans who are around for the 2 Stanley Cups, and they're a pleasure to watch because they give it their full effort every game, and I think that is really to be appreciated because I think the last few years maybe it didn't feel that way. It's the first time since 2018 that games are important now this time of the season. So I think it's an exciting time for the Kings. I mean, I don't think no one thinks they're going to win the cup this year, but you know what? Any experience they get this year is going to be great for down the road.
At dinner, Jesse, we were talking a little bit about Rob Blake and what he inherited, which was not much, frankly, a little bit of a mess. And just kind of talk about, you've seen it up close, kind of the evolution of that identity and the extent to which Rob has left his imprint on, on that identity.
I think that when Rob Blake took over this team, there was an uncomfortable decision to be made looming in the future. And I think that the best of teams in the best of circumstances have to deal with the passing of time, right? Whether it's the Oilers dynasty, the Canadiens, times change, players age out, and you have to adjust to the reality. So when Rob Blake took over this team, there was an expectation that had already been established of cup contention. And it doesn't last for every team. And I think that he and the rest of the executives anticipated it in a way that for me, and I've talked about this a number of times on the podcast, you can see with his first move was acquiring Cal Peterson. And that was when the window, arguably was still open. And he stopped trading draft picks right away. And, every move that he made when he took over, even if it was to address the present, was done with an eye towards the future. And that, to me, is how you execute a successful, I don't even like the word rebuild, but if we're going to use it, that's how you do it. You always have an eye towards the future because no matter how much success or failure you have in the present, there's always a next season. There's always a season after that. There's always a season after that. So whether it's acquiring Cal Peterson, whether it's signing Alex Iafallo, Sean Walker, making trades to get Trevor Moore, all the other players, Sean Dursey, Carl Grunstrom, that have come in, we're now seeing, 5 years later in some cases, the payoff for that strategy of always looking towards the future.
Helene, you were part of that same conversation. Your own interpretation of the Blake years and the identities helped carve out here with the franchise.
Yeah, I think that, everybody loved the 2 cup teams, but I think that Dean Lombardi tried to keep it together too long. I think that the style of play in the NHL was changing away from the kind of heavy hockey that those 12 and 14 teams played, and it was going more towards youth and speed. And I think Dean tried to keep the dynasty going at the expense of draft picks and at the expense of the long-term future. And that's a course that Rob Blake had to reverse right away. He had to find the youth, find the speed, and it takes a while to develop. Not every draft pick is going to turn out right. Not every college free agent signing is going to turn out right. But if you look at the timeline of where they are, last summer they were in position where Edler, where Arvidsson, where Deno would be good additions in terms of you're not going to sign a $12 million free agent. They weren't ready for that. It wasn't going to help them win the cup. But those guys brought the veteran presence. Those guys brought the stability, the knowledge, the experience that they're giving to the younger kids, and that will pay off. The next step maybe over this summer, you make a trade, a really high impact trade, or a high impact free agent signing. Doing it last summer wouldn't have made sense. Doing it this summer makes an awful lot of sense. And I'm really curious to see how far they can go in the playoffs. I'm assuming they're going to get in, and I think they probably will. Just to play under pressure. Todd McClellan has been saying, every game for us the last 20 has been a playoff game. And it is, in a sense, but it's not really a playoff game. When you get in there and it's the playoffs, the intensity goes up so much. You all know what it's like watching playoff hockey and how fabulous it is because of that intensity. So I'm curious to see how some of the kids react to that. I suspect a lot of them will learn a lot from it and will flourish. And then the coming summer, you go out and make the impact moves.
Well, let's talk about one of the offseason acquisitions that clearly has worked, which is top of mind because you wrote about him today. Let's talk about the Phillip Deno acquisition and your interpretation of it.
I think that was a terrific move, and as I wrote, Deno has always been known as a defensive-oriented center. He thought he could be a scorer, but he was never really given the chance to produce. He was never put in an offensive role. The Kings saw that in him. He saw it in him. They took a chance, and obviously it's worked. He's scored 21 goals this season, a career high, and the season isn't over yet. But he's also given the Kings that strength down the middle. And if you look at any championship NHL team, any Stanley Cup winning team, there's strength up the middle. You've got Kopitar, you've got Deno. They're both so good on face-offs. They're both good on penalty killing. They're both good defensively, but obviously also bring an offensive element to it. And that means that the kids behind them, the Velardis and Kupari and other young players, don't have to play on the second line. They can stay on the third line or the fourth line and work their way up gradually. So I think that has had a ripple effect and a terrific impact on the Kings this season.
I want to have a little fun with something that you said before about the Kings positioning themselves to really go out into the free agent market this offseason and go get somebody. Who is the ideal free agent? And I should preface this by saying Hans is probably the biggest Los Angeles sports fan across the board on staff. He thinks about these things. Hans, who's your dream free agent in the offseason?
Philip Forsberg.
Okay.
Philip Forsberg. Not if you approve, or just shake your head if you disapprove. Helene, who should they be going after, even if not specifically the type of player that they should be going after?
Well, I think they've gotten to the point where I would like to see a number one left wing who scores more than Alex Iafallo does. I love Iafallo, but if you're going to be a number one line left wing, you got to be producing. It's tough to say right now. There still could be some signatures, some people who, don't go into the free agent market. So it's a little difficult to predict right now, but I think that should be one of their priorities.
Jesse, who's the free agent possibility who's keeping you awake at night?
So I'm going to go ahead and take a very unpopular opinion on this. I think one of the reasons that you focus on a rebuild the way that the Kings have is to bring in the young talent, and to they've made this focus of acquiring all of these high-profile draft picks. We spend a lot of time talking about the depth of the prospect pool, and with Kempe, Arvidsson, Kopitar, Deno, now Moore has joined the group, and whether it's Iafallo or Kupari or Velarde or whoever it's going to be, or Kaliev, they talk about Kaliev being a top six forward. If you sign a free agent, high-profile left winger to a large contract, you've locked up another spot in the top 6 that now one of the prospects can't occupy. And one of the arguments that I frequently find myself having with a lot of the good people out there in the crowd is whether or not the Kings are have a strong track record of developing forward prospects at all. We know their record with goaltenders and defensemen. And one of the arguments I've always made is over the last 10 years, whether it was Kopitar, Carter, Toffoli, Pearson, Brown, Williams, Lucic, Kovalchuk, Penner, Smith, I'm going to stop there, but you all know the names, there wasn't any room for the Jordan Wheels or any of the young prospects to take those spots and to become the players that we want them to be. So if we want Artie Kaliev to become a 30-goal scorer, we have to give him the minutes to score those goals. And signing Philip Forsberg is just trading the last 4 years of high draft picks to put ourselves right back in the situation we were in 3 years ago when we had a bunch of high prospects, high profile, high contract veterans that limited the flexibility. I'd rather see them retain that flexibility while giving those young players an opportunity. Having said that, I am a fan. If they sign a big profile player, I will buy into it, you know, in about 30 seconds, and I'll be sitting up here telling you why it's a great signing. So that's my answer.
So well reasoned, Jesse.
Thank you.
And so unpopular. But the season ends today. They go into the postseason. What is the path to the Cup?
Well, the path to the Cup likely means beating Edmonton and Calgary. And the Kings have shown this year that they're going to play one-goal games with Edmonton and Calgary. They've played the Flames 3 times this year. All 3 games were a Daryl Sutter special, 3-2. They played the Edmonton Oilers to an overtime game, and they played them to a couple games that were one-goal games late in the third period, but expanded late with power play goals or empty netters. So the Kings have played one-goal hockey for the majority of the season. If you look at their goal differential, they're +2 on the year. The Kings aren't beating teams for the most part by 4 or 5 goals. They're winning one-goal games, and it's the experience in those one-goal games that's going to need to carry them in the postseason.
Jesse, same question. Show us a path.
It starts at the net. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that strong goaltending defines playoff runs. It's a cliche to say that if you have a strong goalie, you can... I don't know that there's ever been a team that's won a cup exclusively on the strength of goaltending alone, but certainly a number of teams have found themselves in the final based on goaltending. So I'm a firm believer in the idea that if you have 2 goalies, you have none, and I know Todd McClellan would disagree with me on that front, but I think the path to playoff success for this Kings team is finding a goalie to start in the playoffs and ride that goalie and have that goalie come through and perform.
Helene, I can frame it to you in a slightly different way. Is there a path, and what would that path be, even as a long shot path?
There's absolutely a path. I mean, as you brought up a little bit ago, the Kings were an 8th seed in 2012, and nobody really expected much of them, and then they blitzed everybody, basically. There is a path. As long as everybody is healthy, as long as everybody comes together, as long as everybody is playing as a unit, as long as there's leadership in the locker room, and I think we all know that there is. There's solid leadership there. As long as there's the kids are able to learn and able to recover from mistakes. You know, they're going to make mistakes, but so are the veterans sometimes too. It's how you get back up after you fall that matters. And absolutely, there's a path. And you know, this Stanley Cup playoffs are really unpredictable. I think Colorado obviously is the class of the league, no question. But it's just kind of, everybody thought Vegas would be better this season than they've been. So they've kind of been a disappointment. I think Calgary has been a little bit of a surprise too. You know, and we know that Daryl Sutter knows how to coach in the playoffs, knows how to coach playoff hockey. So there's just any number of possibilities, and that's what makes the Stanley Cup playoffs the best playoffs in any sport, in my mind.
Hans, what does your jaded, dark fan soul tell you is the path for the Kings?
I firmly believe the path for the Kings is maybe 2023. For this reason, when the Kings won the Cup in 2012, they had been to the playoffs in 2010. I think they lost to Vancouver in the first round. 2011, they lost in 6 games, I think, to the Sharks. I still remember Joe Thornton sliding across the center ice, much to the dismay of Kings fans. So at least that team in 2012 had playoff experience. Outside of the core four on this team, there's not a lot of playoff experience. Yeah, you've got Arvidsson and Deno being in the Stanley Cup Finals last year. So I think it might be too much to ask for this younger group to pull it off this year. But I don't think that's in any way anything bad. I mean, I think the experience can only help this team moving forward. And you remember the 2012 team too. They lost the division by 1 point? They lost the last game of the season when I forget, wasn't it someone on the Sharks stuck their stick out? Yeah, from the bench. The Kings ended up losing that game, I think, in overtime. They win that game, they would have been the number one seed. They would have been, they would have won the division that year. So, or maybe not, whatever. But so that team, I know they were an 8th seed, but they were really good, obviously, as it proved. So I think anything this year is just gravy.
So, Hans, since that's a good bridge to our final question for the panel, and that is, since you're kicking the can for the Kings, at least, down to 22-23, who's your pick to win it all this year on April 7th, 2022?
You gotta look at Colorado, I would think.
I'm not going to say Colorado.
That would just be rude because Helene brought him up earlier for Hans to pick Colorado.
I'm going to say, and as a SoCal guy, I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say the New York Rangers.
I like that pick.
I
Helene? Go. Oh, you know what? You have something you want to elaborate?
No. I just think I don't know why. I just think the Rangers have something special going on this year.
Helene?
I would have to look at Colorado. I think just watching Cale Makar I want to see him, as much of him, and have the Avalanche play as long as possible just to watch him, basically. He's incredible. And I think they have the depth. I wonder about the goaltending a little bit, but I would pick Colorado at this point.
Jesse and Zach, I'm not going to put you in the uncomfortable position of saying anybody other than the Kings. So I'll ask you a different
I was
question.
say the Kings.
Question to you two is, other than the Kings, who's a good dark horse pick for these playoffs?
I'm going to say, and I don't know if this counts as a dark horse, but the Florida Panthers. They've had a very large Tampa Bay Lightning hurdle over the last 2 years. But top to bottom, that's got to be one of the deepest teams in the NHL, especially at the forward position. It's hard to call them a dark horse because of where they are in the standings, but when you look at the division that they're in with Carolina and Tampa Bay, that's a big challenge to get out of that division.
Just to get out of the division is going to be their biggest problem.
Just getting out of the division, exactly. So if they can get out of that division, I kind of like them as a team that could get there this year.
Jesse?
Well, now you've got me thinking about what qualifies as a dark horse. I'm going to go with the Maple Leafs just because they have gotten the reputation of a team that performs well in the regular season and then chokes in the first round. And as funny as it is to see them do it every year and watch their fans suffer, I feel like it's always the teams that right when they reach the reputation of everybody saying, they can't do it, the Washington Capitals will never win a cup, that's when they break out and win the cup. So I'll say the Maple Leafs.
In the category of things that I never think I'll see in my lifetime.
See, exactly. That's how you know it's going to happen.
Hey, but who thought the Kings would win the cup, and we saw them win it twice. So anything's possible.